Today is October 25th, 2023. This is the 40th episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast and the 16th episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and today I'll be joined by Joe Meade. And tonight, Joe and I will go over the Big Ten. We'll go through all 14 teams, where we think they'll finish, and our picks for the all-conference teams. So, Joe, we are going to go to Illinois first, alphabetical order. The Fighting Illini are coming off of a really poor season compared to their expectations a year ago. They were 20-13 and 11-9 in the Big Ten. This is Brad Underwood's 7th season. A couple of departures that are no longer there. Matthew Meyer is gone, Jaden Epps is gone, Sky Clark is gone, and RJ Melendez is gone. They've got a couple transfers in. They got Justin Harmon from Utah Valley, Marcus Domask from Southern Illinois, Quincy Guerrier from Oregon, Dra Gibbs Lawhorn, and Amani Hansberry are freshmen coming in. So, Joe, we've got a couple returners, Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, Luke Goody in the mix. What do you think the expectations for Underwood and the Fighting Illini should be?
Yeah, Sean, it's funny. I think what the fan base wants is simply just what's going to happen in March. Now, obviously, they can't finish 8th or 9th in the Big Ten. I think they have expectations to finish top 4 of the conference. I don't think any of their fans expect to compete with Michigan State or Purdue for the regular season title, but it's really about probably putting a consistent product on the floor and a consistently good product. That was their biggest problem last year. You'd see, especially for a veteran Illinois team, a team that would just be up and down, and it would be up and down. It's one thing if it happens like in 1 week, but see throughout January to March, they were just never really found a rhythm. They win a huge game, then come back and lay an egg, and sometimes they'd even lose at home. I think the luckiest game, the game they were luckiest to win in terms of everything, was their home game against Northwestern. I think Northwestern collapsed at the end of the game, and Illinois stormed back. Point being, Sean, is without Northwestern and Michigan collapsing in games in State Farm Arena, I think last year could have been looked at as even worse for the Illini. So I think they just need to find some consistency. They have to stop relying on TJ Shannon. And Coleman Hawkins does really have to step up, both as a leader and on the floor consistently. Sean, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, it just seems like Shannon's got to be the star that he was touted to be when he moved over from Texas Tech. He was great on that Mark Adams Texas Tech team, and he never really found the groove consistently with the Fighting Illini. He was injured. He was in and out, especially late in the year. But how their season goes is going to be pretty contingent on how he plays, I think. A couple stats here before Joe and I give where we think the Fighting Illini will finish. In KenPom, Illinois opened up at 19th. He predicts that they'll have the 18th most efficient offense and 21st most efficient defense. In Bart Torvik, they're a little lower, 29th, 37th in offense, and 23rd in defense. So they should have a top 25 defense, but according to these metrics, their offense, people don't really know what they're going to get from the Fighting Illini when it comes to scoring the ball. They've got a couple returners, a couple of new players that are names that fans will recognize from some of their other schools, but consistency will be the name of the game. So, Joe, I'll let you go first for this one. Where do you think the Fighting Illini will finish?
I think Illinois will finish in 5th, Sean. I think they will be around that top 4 most of the year. I think maybe they could fade into 7 or 8 if they have the same issues with consistency as they had last year. But ultimately, Illinois fans are only going to judge this season based on where they are on the second weekend. If they're at home, they're probably feeling more of the same and how they feel right now. And if they're playing, we'll be having a different conversation.
Yeah, I also have them 5th, Joe. They have opened up in the top 25. I think they'll probably be in and out of the top 25 very frequently this year. And if they are in it consistently, that'll be a pretty good sign. They certainly have a chance to be a top 25 team, but whether that's them for the whole year is yet to be seen. So we'll turn the page on the Fighting Illini, Joe, and the next team in the order is my Indiana Hoosiers. They were 23-12 and 12-8 in the Big Ten last year. They lost to Miami in the round of 32. This is Mike Woodson's third season at the helm. Pretty much a full starting five worth of players is departing. Trace Jackson-Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino are in the NBA. Race Thompson and Miller Kopp have graduated, and Tamar Bates and Jordan Geronimo have transferred out. A lot of minutes leaving the Hoosiers this year, but they have replaced them with some highly touted freshmen and transfers. Kel'el Ware comes in from Oregon. Anthony Walker comes in from Miami, Florida. Peyton Sparks comes in from Ball State. They have three freshmen. Mackenzie Mbako is the highly touted one from New Jersey, and Gabe Cupps from Ohio, and Ja'Kai Newton, also from Ohio, I think. So a ton of turnover in this team, Joe. We've talked about it briefly before, but I'll let you go first on this one. What do you think the expectations for the Hoosiers should be this year, and ultimately, what do you think is going to happen?
I think Indiana, like Illinois, maybe even more so, is a very smart fan base. They have pretty reasonable expectations in terms of where they'll finish in the conference. I think they know that they're turning over a whole new starting five practically. So I think the key for them is going to be getting this clicking by the turn of 2024. I think, as we previewed, they have a very tough non-conference schedule and tough conference schedule in December. So I think they just need a couple things together. I think Indiana fans by January could adjust their expectations. I do think the absolute floor for this team has to be they get into March. I don't think there's any way Indiana fans would be okay with missing the tournament in year 3 of Mike Woodson. With that said, year 1, they've gone to the first 4 last year, the round of 32. I think the ceiling for this team could be Sweet 16, and I think that's what some Indiana fans expect. I think short of that, majority of them would be, I don't think disappointed's the right word, but maybe a little, impatient. It's been quite a while for Indiana. Sean knows it better than anyone. So, Sean, what do you have to say?
Yeah, the roster certainly has a lot of talent. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. It seems to be pretty imbalanced, though. There are a guard short from being a surefire top 25 team, which means the guards that are there, a lot is going to hinge on how they play. Xavier Johnson, who missed almost the entire season last year with a broken foot, will be the leader. He'll be the guy. I would assume that he would lead the team in points, or at least he should. And then Trey Galloway, who has done really well at times and really poorly at other times. Those are the two guards, really. You'll have either a freshman or a CJ Gunn, who's a sophomore who didn't play much last year, as your only other options, really, at the 1 or the 2. So Xavier Johnson 2 years ago when Indiana made that late run in the season, and then into the Big Ten tournament and then into the first 4, Xavier Johnson was playing like one of the best players in the country. So he'll have to do that again. In terms of expectations, I think Indiana will be really similar to Illinois. They might pop into the top 25. They might hop out. But for them to really be in the top 25 for the entire season, they've got to pick off a couple of these early games. And I don't see that just from it might take some time for them to figure it out. I do think the best version of the Hoosiers will be in February and March. And it may come with a couple of ugly losses because they are playing 2 of the top 4 teams in the country for the most part in the non-conference. So I think if Indiana does start off poorly and loses by 30 or more to some of these good teams, I don't think that is bad in any way, as long as it's not to a team that is not going to make the tournament. But Joe, I have got them one spot above Illinois in 4th. Where do you have the Hoosiers?
I have the Hoosiers in 7th. I think there's just a lot of familiarity that's going to have to be figured out early on in the year. I do think Indiana will finish, the year strong. I do not think they will have as good a season in terms of where they finish. I know they had that bye last year in the Big Ten tournament, the double bye, I should say. I do not think they get it this year, but I think it's a team that will get better. I'll put it this way. The team in December is going to be far worse than the team you see in March come the Big Ten tournament. So I don't think it'll be a bad year for Indiana at all, and 7 is not an insult. It's just a matter of a new team figuring things out. So
we'll turn the page to the final team that starts with an I, Joe. That is the Iowa Hawkeyes. Last year they were 19-14 overall and 11-9 in the Big Ten. Fran McCaffrey is back for season number 14, and they lose a pretty. They lose a lot of scoring and a lot of minutes. Chris Murray is in the NBA. Philip Rebracha has graduated. Connor McCaffrey has also graduated, and Aaron Eulis has transferred out. They do bring a couple of players in. Ben Kreike and Evan Bronze are transfers, and then a couple of freshmen, most notably led by Price Sanford. Yes, that's the brother of Peyton Sanford. Tony Perkins is back. Peyton Sanford's back. Patrick McCaffrey is back. But other than that, this team certainly seems to be lacking what they had the last couple years, and that's a surefire NBA player. We'll dive into the statistics here real quick for Iowa. It should be more of the same. They're 50th in KenPom, 12th in adjusted offense, and 108th in adjusted defense. A complete 180 from their football team, Joe, which is quite interesting. Iowa 45th in Bart Torvik, and more of the same offense and defense numbers, 7 and 125. So, Joe, Iowa coming off of a couple years in a row here of really poor performances in the NCAA tournament. What do you think their expectations should be for this upcoming season?
I don't know, Sean. I think the fact they don't have a Murray brother there, and then they lose a lot of experience. I don't know what I could say about this team, Sean. Really, there's a lot of unknown here. Normally, every year, there's one guy you can point at and say he's going to be the go-to guy that carries them. I don't really see that this year. I think they have a great home court advantage, but I think eventually this defense thing is going to catch up to them. It's caught up to them plenty of times in the NCAA tournament, and I know they've had great conference success. And 2 years ago, they're the Big Ten tournament champions. But Sean, this team has to play stinking defense at a certain point, right?
Yes. Yeah. The rest of the Big Ten will play defense this year, more so than any other year, I think. And, you talk about their guy. Is it really going to be Peyton Sanford? Like, he's had some great games before, but can you count on him for 16, 17 a night? I would lean towards no, but he is certainly capable of dropping 25 and a half and knocking 8 or 9 threes down. But Joe, just a little note here is Rebracha. They've got the stats of the people who have left here. He averaged 14.1 points and 7.5 rebounds per game last year. That's certainly, not that he's a bad player by any stretch, but those stats were a lot better than I remember as a watcher. So Rebracha stood up against all of the bigs fairly competently in the conference. So he's going to be a little bit of a bigger miss than we initially thought. But Joe, where do you have the Hawkeyes finishing this year?
I am not very high on the Hawkeyes. I'm cautious in saying I think they do finish 12th. I think they're due for a down year. I think they've had very good regular seasons. Obviously, we don't have to mention the tournament success, but I do think this lack of defense and lack of a go-to guy, at least a bona fide go-to guy like one of the Murray brothers, is going to hurt them. So I do have them finishing 12th, Sean.
I have them a couple spots above in 8th. I think that's our biggest disagreement.
Yeah.
From what I could tell from you sending me your list just before, but I think their offense will win them some games, and they'll be in the 9, 10, 11 win range, unless their offense is bad. Because if they don't score it, they're going to lose. But the middle of this conference is so interchangeable, and when the calendar turns to 24, I think we should go and redo power rankings here, Joe, after the non-conference and see where they stack up. Because I did the preseason versus the middle of the season one last year was drastically different, with teams 7 and 8 spots different than what we had them to start just after 12 or 13 games. But that is all for Iowa. I think they certainly can make the tournament, but I would lean towards under 50% right now. Let's see what. So Bart Torvik gives them 43% chance to make the tournament. I would say that's probably about right. There's certainly ways that could happen, but also a lot of ways that it can't. So now, Joe, we'll go to the M's, and the first one is the Maryland Terrapins, 22-13 a year ago, 11-9. They did lose in the first round to West Virginia last year. They were tied for 5th in the Big Ten. Kevin Willard is back for year 2 at the Xfinity Center. They do lose a couple of key players. Hakeem Hart, Don McCary, Ian Martinez are gone. No superstars, though. They did bring in a ton of freshmen and 2 transfers, Jordan Geronimo from IU and Chance Stevens from Loyola Marymount. They do bring back Jameer Young, who might be talked about later, and Julian Reese. Those 2 guys played over 30 minutes a game last year and averaged in double digits. We sort of mentioned it earlier, Joe, when we previewed their schedule. They have a big 3 and not much else. But there's certainly a lot to be excited about for Maryland going into year 2. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and Sean, they did lose to Alabama in the round of 32.
Oh, that's right. They beat West Virginia.
Listeners. Yes.
Yeah.
With that said, I think, by all accounts, Kevin Willard had a great first year. I think it's been a very positive switch for him. I see them carry the momentum over, especially with that big 3 we mentioned and mentioned on previous cast, Sean. I think having a core of guys, none of them who necessarily carry the team in scoring, but have kind of a balanced method where you don't need just one guy to go off. I think they took turns last year doing that. And a team that was very good at home last year, Sean. I believe they were 10-0 at home in the Big Ten. I do think that's going to be the same this year. Maybe they go 9-1 or, God forbid, 8-2. But winning your home games in this conference matters, especially when it comes to where you finish in the standings. I don't think this will be a team that has too much fluctuation like they did last year between home and away. I do think they'll be a high floor, low ceiling team, and not a bad thing at all. I think it'll be a very consistent across the board team, especially year 2 in Kevin Willard's system. I do think those 3 guys are going to be relied on for leadership. John, what do you have to say?
I think that they're probably a top 25 team, if I had to guess as of now. They're just a lot better than other teams in the conference. I think they should not be caught up in the middle of this conference. They, if you think about it, to get a double bye, 13 wins definitely does it, and 12 probably does it too. So you don't have to be 8-2 on the road. If you're 5-5, even 4-6 on the road, that's still pretty good. And with how they play at home, I think you're looking at 3-4 wins on the road in the conference, and you're going to be in real good shape because you're going to get 8, 9, or 10 at home. Joe, I've got them 3rd as kind of the best of the rest. I think they will put themselves above that middle pack. They will stand clear of the jumble on the last day of being 7th if they lose and 3rd if they win. I do have them in the top 25, and I think there's a lot to be excited about for the Terrapins.
Yeah, Sean, I also have them 1 spot lower. I have them in 4th. I do think they get that double bye. And really what it comes down to is a team that protects home court because of that nucleus of veterans they have. And I do think they're going to have a better than 1-9 or 2-8 road record like they did last year. So 4th for Maryland.
So the next team we'll go to here, Joe, is your Michigan Wolverines. Last year they were 18-16 and 11-9 in the conference. They made it to the second round of the NIT. This is year 5 for Juwan Howard, and it's going to come up with a pretty new roster. Hunter Dickinson is at Kansas, Kobe Buffkin and Jet Howard are in the NBA, and Joey Baker has graduated. They do bring in 3 pretty highly ranked transfers, Olivier and Kamwa from Tennessee, Trey Jackson from Seton Hall, and Amari Burnett from Alabama. They have 2 freshmen, Lee Ayala and George Washington III. Joe, this is a lot different of a roster from last year. Certainly probably a team that underachieved the most out of any of the teams in the Big Ten. But there seems to be a little bit of, I don't want to say sneaky optimism, but a little optimism that it might be better than last year. You've got, you should have a much better defense, and from my point of view, I think it's going to come down to how much they can score, because there isn't a bona fide scorer at the top level here. You've had some people do it here and there. Doug McDaniel is back, and Kamwa is a good player at Tennessee, but we've talked about their rotation and how they play 12 players, and 4 of them have double digits one game, and then they don't play for 2 games. Jalen Llewellyn will be back, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe missed part of the beginning of the season.
Mhm.
But I think there's certainly a path to a NCAA tournament here for Michigan and getting in the middle of the pack. But I do think the floor is very low for this Michigan team. I think things could get pretty ugly if you don't pull off some wins early. So I'll leave it up to you. Anything to add on the Wolverines?
Yeah, Sean, I think you hit everything right on the head, as you always do. I think Michigan's biggest problem is a similarity we've seen with Iowa and kind of with Maryland. Here's what I mean. I think there are three guys on this team that could consistently, I don't want to say carry it, but could be the difference between a victory or a loss. That's Doug McDaniel, Olivier Combois, and Namari Burnett. I do think Terrace Reed is what he is. He's probably gotten a little better offensively. He's a great rebounder, a great defender, but he's a guy that's not going to put up the production scoring wise Hunter Dickinson did. I think maybe he averages 9, 10 a night, which is fine as long as he protects the rim. I think they kind of go the way those three guys go: Kamwa, Burnett, and McDaniel. I think Doug has the highest ceiling as a scorer, and I do think Amari Burnett hasn't reached his full potential yet. He was a 5-star recruit in 2020. Uh, really was excited both the fan bases of Texas Tech and Bama when he transferred or committed to those schools. Now on his third and final shot at Michigan. Sean, with all that said, I think they have enough defenders on this team. I think having a good defense is almost a given. It's just, can Namari, Doug, or Kama be that consistent go-to guy with some help from like Trey Jackson, Shedder, or maybe even Terrence Williams off the bench. So with that said, Sean, I do have Michigan finishing at eighth. I think the combination of the veterans on that team will win them a few games based on that. I don't think they will have the late game collapses that they did last year because statistically it's almost impossible to replicate that. So I have them finishing eighth, and for the ninth time in 10 years, they'll be playing in the noon game on Thursday or potentially the Friday game, which is the game it seems them and Indiana are married to.
I'm going to read a couple of stats out, Joe, here for Michigan. 44th in KenPom, 46th on offense, and 42nd on defense. I would have to think that 44th is a good spot to be come the end of the year. But I would think that the defensive numbers are going to be a lot better than 42nd, and the offensive numbers are probably not going to be that good. Bart Torvik is a little bit harsher on the Wolverines for 59th and 63rd in offense and 61st on defense. So, you know, that those metrics are not, you know, the Bible quite yet. They're taking players and what they've done at old schools, and you know, players could be a good defender, but you know the rest of the team wasn't very good at defense. So there's a lot to, you know, not a ton to take from these numbers, but I've got them one spot below in ninth. I think that this Michigan team will say a lot about Juwan Howard and his ability to coach, because he's going to have to do his work to get points on the board. And offense has not really been an issue in his time, if I'm not mistaken. I do think you need one of the forwards, not including Nkamwa, to kind of be like a solid starter, whether that's Cheddar, Jackson, or Reed, or
Terrence, yeah.
Williams even. Like,
Yeah.
I think you need one of them to step up and show a little bit more than what they have in their time either at Michigan or their previous school. And I think if you can get that, if you can get a solid four, and Kamala could play the four sometimes, I think, you know, you could carve out a team that can compete. But you've got chances in the non-conference to put yourself in a good spot, and you know that Michigan will be right around that 10-10 mark, and it will probably come down to the last couple games, as it has a couple times now for the Wolverines. So Joe, will go to your in-state rival, the Michigan State Spartans, 21-13, 11-8. Last year, that was good enough for fourth. They made the Sweet 16. This is Izzo's 29th season at the helm. Only one major departure, and that would be Joey Hauser, 14-7. Certainly a really solid player for the Spartans and for Marquette in his time in college. They do bring in 4 freshmen, highlighted by Xavier Booker, who is probably the best, one of the most highly touted freshmen in the conference. They do bring back I would say their entire starting five for most of the season a year ago: Hogard, Tyson Walker, Jaden Akins, Malik Hall, Madi Sissoko. There's a lot of reasons to think that Michigan State is one of the best teams in the country, and if they have to be expecting a Final Four.
Sean, this is the most hype I've ever seen around a Michigan State basketball team. And I'm not going to even insult their football team because I think part of the hype is through that. But they have everything you dream of in a basketball team. You have experienced veterans, you have freshman talent that could come in and learn from those guys. And then you just have hustle guys. I don't know how else to say it. This is what Michigan State basketball fans love: slapping the floor, playing defense, effort guys, Hogard, Akins, and Hall. I don't think any of them are stars. Hogard certainly has gotten a lot better, but I think they're going to have to ride Tyson Walker, maybe one of these freshmen, Xavier Booker here and there. With all that said, Sean, the expectations around this team, I think the only team that could stop Michigan State from accomplishing a Big Ten title or going to a Final Four is themselves. There's no other way to put it. I've never seen Thomaso this relaxed and this happy in coaching a team, even his 2017-18 or his 2015-16 teams. He had some uneasy moments. Not to say that Michigan State won't lose a game or have some rough patches throughout the year, but I just don't see a weak spot in this team in terms of locker room presence or even on the floor. Maybe Sissoko's, you could criticize him all you want, but he's gained 20 pounds. I'm willing to believe he's not gotten worse, and it's probably gotten a little better. So, Sean, with all that said, where do you have the Spartans?
I have the Spartans finishing second, and I think that a lot would have to go wrong for them not to finish second, or first. Them and the team that we have in the other spot in the top two are, I think, well above the rest, even Maryland, who I just praised a lot. I think 15-5 is certainly attainable for the Spartans. They have a lot of players who have been there before. They do have a real tough non-conference schedule as usual, but I think they're a little more ready for it than they have been in the past. Last year was very odd. They played that game on the aircraft carrier against Gonzaga, and it was windy, so nobody can shoot. And I think you throw that one out. But they have enough big games where they'll win a couple of them, even if they're not a good team, which they are this year. And I think they'll be in a great spot for a protected seed come NCAA tournament. And I do think it is a two-horse race. I have them just losing out and finishing second, but they certainly have national championship aspirations and maybe the best chance of any team in our conference. But where do you have them?
Sean, I have them first, and then someone just texted me. You didn't say where you had Michigan, so just I guess we'll wrap this up with where you have Michigan too.
Oh, I have them ninth.
Ninth, okay, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, but as Sean said, we're going to be talking about Michigan State and Purdue most of the year in the title race, we're presuming. So Michigan State I have first, but I think them and Purdue are going to be in a salsa dance, for lack of a better term, for most of the year.
And Michigan State does get it, well, not started. It's game 3 of the season for them, but they do play Duke in the Champions Classic. That's a great opportunity for a big win early on. The metrics are not as bullish on the Spartans as we are. They're 13th in Ken Palm, 17th in offense, 10th in defense, and 8th in Bart Torvik, 5th in offense, and 29th in defense. So a pretty... one has them being better defensively and one has them better offensively. I think they'll be really good on both sides of the ball, so I wouldn't read too much into that. But they are up there. They're going to be up there, and they might be our conference's best chance of breaking the title drought. So next up is Minnesota. 9-22 last year and 2-17 in the Big Ten. That was last. This is Ben Johnson's 3rd season. At the barn, they do lose Jamison Battle to Ohio State, and then Talon Cooper, Jaden Henley, and Taurus Samuels also transfer out. They do bring in a couple transfers: Jack Wilson, Elijah Hawkins, Mike Mitchell. Joe, this seems like Minnesota is definitely the worst team in the conference, and probably Ben Johnson's final year. They do have Dawson Garcia, who's a pretty solid player, but other than that, they don't seem to have a Big Ten quality roster. Anything else to say other than this is going to be a pretty rough one for the Golden Gophers?
Yeah, I think maybe record-wise in the conference they get better just because it was so abysmal last year, but I don't think that's even enough to stay out of the basement cellar. I do have them in 14th. I do feel for Ben Johnson. I think he was tasked with a pretty difficult rebuild, especially after the way Richard Pitino went out. So, uh, not much else to say, Sean. This is just a game all the 13 teams want to avoid losing because that could be probably them and perhaps Penn State could be the only teams where if you lost to them, it would count as a really bad loss toward March. But
Yeah, their non-conference schedule isn't very impressive. They do host Missouri. That's their only power conference game. So if they were to lose a couple of these non-conference games, that becomes a Georgetown-like season is on the horizon, unfortunately for them. But I have them last, Joe, in 14th, and there's not much argument for anything else other than 13th or 14th.
yep.
But where do you have them?
Oh, I had a 14th, Sean. I was just getting so tired and sick of talking about Minnesota,
Yeah.
so I wanted to move on to the next team.
Yep. So my Indiana Hoosiers play them twice. Not happy about that at all. They tried really hard to lose at the Barn last year, but Minnesota didn't want to win, so Indiana was able to scrape that one. But there's a real chance that this becomes a quad 3 loss, and that is seed line really tough on your seed line, or getting a seed line in general, getting in the tournament. So it'll be tough for Minnesota. I would be very surprised if Ben Johnson is their coach next year. No disrespect to him, but he's in a tough situation, and there's not many ways that this can get better. So that's Minnesota. We'll go to Nebraska now. They were 16-16 a year ago, 9-11 in the Big Ten. They were tied for 11th. This is Fred Hoiberg's 5th season at the helm in Lincoln. They do lose Sam Griesel, Derek Walker off their team last year. They both were double digits. They bring in a couple transfers. Jaron Coleman, Rink Mast, Bryce Williams, and Josiah Alec. Ball State, Bradley Charlotte, and New Mexico. So no Power 5 transfers there. They do return C.J. Wilcher, Juwan Gary, Keisei Tominaga, but not much else. Joe, Nebraska, I think, did a little better than we thought a year ago. Is there any way that you could see them making the step up and potentially getting an NCAA tournament berth this year?
I do, Sean. I'm a lot higher on Nebraska than other people. Maybe you call it blind faith, but I'm really a believer in Fred Hoiberg. I was a big fan of what he did at Iowa State. I do think he was so unlucky with his timing, his first year being the one that was cut short, and then your year two, which is your most critical year in terms of getting players and showing the changes you made, was COVID, and we all know how rough that was. So I do think this is the year they step it up. I don't know if they get into March, Sean, but I think riding Tominaga, I do think one of these transfers eventually he's going to have to pick up. He's gone to the portal quite a lot. I think the combo of Tominaga and some of the older guys, and simply the fact that they now know they can't they always have to have their foot on the gas pedal because that's what's really cost them these quad 3 and 4 losses early in the year. So I have them finishing 10th, shot. I think Pinnacle Bank is a great home court advantage. I do think they have the ability to catch teams sleeping. No better example than Ohio State 2 years ago. So, yeah, Sean, I have them finishing 10th. I do think that's a prediction that could come back to bite me or make me look like a genius. So, Sean, where do you have the Huskers?
I've got them one spot below in 11th. Last year they had a good conference season, 9-11. They won a couple of home games against good teams, and they really should have won a couple more. They had Purdue early in the year, and it's when Purdue was rolling, and they let it slip away. But they played themselves out of contention in their non-conference schedule. They can't do that this year. Just looking at their schedule, I'm not going to put it up, but their first 4 games, they should all win by 20 plus. teams in the 300s, high 200s. They have an Oregon State team on a neutral that's a quad 3. Got to win that. And they have two major games, Creighton at home and Kansas State away. You get one of those, and you go into January with a one loss. I don't think that's a crazy ask, and I think that you can put yourself in position for a 10-10, 9-11 type of Big Ten season, and then you could see your name called on Selection Sunday. I think, it's probably less than 50%, but if they build off what they did well last year, they made threes, they played defense, and they competed in a lot of games. So I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic if you're a Husker fan, and an NCAA tournament, a hope for an NCAA tournament berth is not completely out of the question, which is as much of a compliment as we could give Nebraska, considering that they've been really bad the last couple of years. But I think there's certainly room to build on what they did well last year. So we will go to Northwestern next, Joe. We 22-12 a year ago and 12-8 in the Big Ten. That was good enough for the 2 seed. Remember, come tournament time, they made it to the round of 32. This is Chris Collins' 11th year at the helm. They do lose Robbie Barron, Chase Audige, and Julian Roper, and they do bring in a couple transfers: Ryan Langford from Princeton, Blake Preston from Liberty, Justin Mullins from Denver, and a couple of freshmen. The big returner is Boo Buie. They bring back Ty Berry, Brooks Barnheiser, and Matthew Nicholson. Joe, Northwestern shocked all of us a lot by making the tournament last year and being a really good team. There's a lot of reason for them there's a lot of reason to believe that they can do that again.
Yeah, Sean, I think this is Chris Collins' biggest issue at Northwestern. The year after they made the tournament in 2017, 2018 brought a lot of guys back and just fell flat on their face. I think this is his biggest year, not in terms of job security, but in terms of proving that this is a sustainable product without having to revamp anything. I think with Boo Boo, Barnheiser, Nicholson, it's not as good of a trio as the one Maryland has of returners. Certainly not close to Michigan State's either, but I'd certainly say it's still a really good one. I do think having Bowie back, one of your best scorers, probably one of the best scorers in the country, and that's going to win you a lot of games. And Northwestern's a tricky team. I don't think their home court advantage is so great, but they're a team that picks off road victories, pretty frequently, especially last year. With all that said, Sean, I have them finishing 6th. I do really like that. The one thing I don't like is, they're a team that could lose at home, and their bad is really, really bad, but they're good to really good is going to beat most teams in this conference, with the exception of maybe Michigan State or Purdue. So,
yeah, you mentioned the away. I think they had either one less or as many away wins in the conference last year as they did home wins. That doesn't seem sustainable. I think they caught a lot of teams at the right time. They were not the second best team in the conference last year. They were still a good team, probably 4th or 5th. They end up 2nd on some tiebreakers. I think they played a lot of teams at the right time, but there's definitely room to make the tournament again for Northwestern. Bowie is about as good as it gets at the end of a game as anyone. They play defense well. They should make the tournament again. I've got them one spot below you, Joe. I've got them at 7th. I think a lot of things went right last year for them to end up at the 2 seed and then as a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I don't think that it will go that well, but I do give them probably an over 50% chance to make the tournament again. And if that happens, Chris Collins will have gone from one of the hottest seats to one of the most secure jobs in a matter of 2 years, and that doesn't usually happen. But you've got them 6th, I've got them 7th. I think a lot of reason to believe that Northwestern can do it again. I don't a very high floor for the Wildcats this year. They'll win games. They just do. Seems like every game that they played last year was close. They don't have a crazy difficult non-conference schedule, so they probably do need to win 12 games to make the tournament. But with their ability to get road wins, that should be pretty attainable. We are going next to Ohio State. And Joe, I think I'm not sure the national conversation about Ohio State is getting things right here. Last year they were 16-19, 5-15, super disappointing. They're in the top 25 and they end up as one of the worst teams in the conference. And they did play well in the Big Ten tournament, but this is year 6 for Chris Holtmann in Columbus. Bryce Sensabaugh, Justice Suing, Sean McNeil, and Isaac Likely are gone. They do bring in Jamison Battle from Minnesota, Dale Bonner from Baylor, and then 4 freshmen. You return Bruce Thornton, Felix Okpara, Zed Key is back and apparently healthy. Roddy Gale is back. Last year was such a disappointment. Do you think Ohio State can bounce back and get back into that team that used to make the tournament every season?
Absolutely, Sean. I think I have a lot more faith in Ohio State basketball and Chris Holtmann than a lot of people nationally and maybe even in Columbus. I think it was a product of just had so many young teams there, Sean, and eventually one wasn't going to work out. I think they're going to ride Bruce Thornton and Jamison Battle offensively. I think Thornton showed flashes last year of being that guy, and I argue he doesn't even have to be the dude this year with Battle. I think he could they could trade off when one's the sidekick and one's the main superhero. So I just find it strange that people write off Chris Holtmann. He's had 20 wins every year except last year. It's kind of one of those things where, people react too much in the moment. I have them finishing 9th, Sean. I think they're still a very young team. I still think guys like Thornton and Akpar are going to figure things out. It's their second year, so they're still going to grow a ton. But I think what we saw at the end of last year, making that run to the Big Ten tournament, kind of showed them the team they can be when they're playing their best basketball. So have the Buckeyes finishing 9th, and then in my scenario, Michigan and Ohio State playing at noon on a Thursday. That's a good enough reason for me to not do work from 12 to 2 Eastern time.
Yeah, I've got them one spot below in 10th. I trust Chris Holtmann probably as much as I trust any coach other than Izzo and Painter in the Big Ten. He's gotten it right far more times than he hasn't. He took over a Butler team and really brought them into the top of the Big East and then didn't really take any time to get going at Ohio State. I just think that last year they did not defend very well, and they scored fairly well, and then you're taking away a couple of their best scorers from a year ago. So it will be better from last year. They will get more than 5 wins. I think they're going to be right near the bubble. A lot of inconsistency. Zed Key is key, honestly. He is one of the best players in the conference, but he really wasn't himself last year with that shoulder injury. But if they get him going and Jamison Battle can be the guy on a team that doesn't stink in the Big Ten, I think there's ways that Ohio State could end up in that 7 or 8 seed range, but the ceiling is not as high as some of these other teams that are going to be in the middle. I think they're probably the team that is going to be the closest to the bubble of any of the Big Ten teams right now. And I would say to Ohio State, let's win a couple early, just so you can prove that last year was more of the fluke than what usually happens. So it will be really interesting to see how Ohio State bounces back, because nobody really saw that coming, and it got ugly pretty fast there. But that's one of the more puzzling teams that really could go either way. Next team, Joe, we got Penn State. Mike Rhodes' first season at the helm. They were 23-14 and 10-10 last year, but almost an entirely new roster. Mike Rhodes comes over from VCU. They lose Jalen Pickett, Seth Lundy, Andrew Funk, Cameron Winter, Miles Dredd. They do bring in a ton of transfers. Qudus Wahab from Georgetown. He was also at Maryland before that. DeMarco Dunn from UNC. Puff Johnson from UNC. Zach Hicks from Temple. And then Kern Jr. and Baldwin Jr. from VCU. So, Joe, this team is entirely different from a year ago. I don't know what to expect from the Nittany Lions. I do think it will be tough at times, but we really haven't seen any of these players before. So what do you make of the Nittany Lions?
Don, I don't know what to make of it, really. It's I have to go off recent history. I do think Mike Rhodes was a great hire from VCU. I'm just going to expect them to be not the stylistically, but the kind of team most teams are in year one of coaches in this transfer portal era. Kind of what Micah Shrewsbury had to deal with year one in 2021 and 22. Kind of crazy to think he was out of there in 2 years. So I think they're a team that'll compete. I think Mike Rhodes is going to be instilling his program, his offensive philosophy, and his philosophy as a whole as a head coach. So I think it's about just getting familiar with it. I don't think any Penn State fan is expecting Penn State to have any kind of repeat of last year. So I think with that said, he uses that to his advantage. They do have who am I missing? Baldwin.
Yep.
Yeah.
He'll be their guy.
Yeah, they do have a go-to guy. Hopefully, he could teach that to some of the younger guys on the team, and they get some momentum in recruiting. But I think the story of the season for Penn State is more what happens off the floor in the locker room as opposed to record-wise. So with that said, Sean, I have them finishing 13th. Even if they finish 14th, I don't think anyone is going to be too upset. It's really about what's going to happen between now and next year. Next year, they have to start getting into the tournament conversation. But
Yeah, I have them 13th also, Joe. I don't really think that this year matters at all, to be honest. They have some talented players, and Baldwin was the A-10 player of the year, but he doesn't play a lot of games. He's been injured for so if he could be available for them for the whole season, that would mean a lot. But every other player is going to have to play more of a role than they did previously, and that's a little scary from a Penn State point of view. You know, you've got Puff Johnson, who was a fringe starter at UNC. He's probably going to have to be option 2. And Kern was a starter at VCU, but he's probably going to have to be option 3. And, you know, all these players are going to have to step up and do more than they have before, and that's, you know, you don't know how that's going to go. Some players, like Zach Edey, became so much better when they got more opportunities. Zach Edey, his first 2 years, was a platoon with Travion Williams and did well when he was in there, but he only played 18 minutes a game. So just because you're being asked to do more isn't always a red flag, but I do think it will be difficult at times for Penn State this year. But VCU used to guard against teams that were way better than them. So, I wouldn't say that this year completely doesn't matter for them, but if you can win a couple of games and not come in last, I think that'll be enough momentum to get this thing going at Penn State, because we like the coach, but, it's just not, there's just not enough talent to sustain the 20-game Big Ten season, I don't think, and it will be tough for them. But Penn State fans, I know that basketball being kind of at the forefront of your athletics last spring and last late winter was really fun. And it stinks for them that was taken away so quickly, because that was maybe a month of Shrewsbury ball. Was so fun to watch, and just like that, it's gone, and now in South Bend, Indiana. So Penn State, I do think, you know, they could pull off a couple upsets this year, but I don't see a 20 game season going better than maybe 6-14. They just have, if Baldwin does go down, then they're probably no better than Minnesota. So hopefully Penn State, it's the start of a great coaching career for Mike Rhodes, but don't see a way that it goes well in year one. So, Joe, we're going to go to the next team. That is the Purdue Boilermakers, 29-6 and 15-5 a year ago. The Big Ten regular season champions, the Big Ten tournament champions, and the number one team in the country for most of the year. But what we will all remember is their round of 64 loss to Fairleigh Dickinson. It's now 3 years in a row they've lost to a double-digit seed in the NCAA tournament. They return a lot of players. Brandon Newman and David Jenkins to rotation guards are the only ones that are not back, and they bring in one freshman and Lance Jones, a transfer from Southern Illinois. Braden Smith is back, Fletcher Lawyer's back, Kaufman Wren is back, Morton's back, Gillis First. The whole group is back, and then of course the big man Zach Edey is back as well. Joe, Purdue will be awesome. They probably will be a top 4 seed, barring disaster. It seems like it really doesn't matter to Purdue fans what happens until come NCAA tournament time, because they do need to find some success there.
Yeah, Sean, I know pretty thorough last year, and even I think maybe the biggest thing you look for if you're a Purdue fan is how this goes down the stretch. If you have bad stretches in December and January, I think that's a lot better than having a bad stretch in February, March, which is your basketball, quite frankly. Not that anyone saw Fairleigh Dickinson on the horizon, but maybe rely more on these guys like Fletcher Lawyer, Smith, Gillis. They need to rely on. Obviously, they're going to rely on Edie, but they need to get these other sidekicks, for lack of a better term, to step up, play better, and really staying healthy is going to be key for this Purdue team. I do think that they struggle with injuries, not even with Edie, but with other guys. They could be in some trouble. Not in terms of not making the tournament, but in terms of staying top 4 or even winning the conference title. So, Sean, with all that said, it's no surprise. I bet you have them first. I have Purdue second. But that's not going to satisfy the fan base. We'll gauge their fan base come tourney time. If the second weekend and they're not there, or if they're losing to a double-digit seed again, I think we're going to have more of the same conversation.
Yeah, I talked about it before. It, they have a super high floor. They're a really top 4 seed. I can't see them being worse than that. You've got Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith coming back point, and they should, because they're really solid. The 2 games to Indiana and the NCAA tournament are probably the things that the fans are looking forward to most, because as good as last year was, they did get swept by their rival, and they did get bounced in the first round. And there's a lot of teams that Michigan State ends up winning the league. That doesn't mean that it's a bad season for them. Coming top 2 is they'll still be in great shape. And that they were not included in the field of 68. They were the first team out, and they ended up losing in the first round of the NIT to Hofstra. But at that point, you can kind of write that off. Steve Peichel's back for year 8 at the Jersey Mike's Arena. They do lose 2 players that were a part of the program for a while, and one in Cam Spencer that made a pretty big impact in his 1 year there. But Spencer is gone at 13 points a game. Caleb McConnell is gone, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. And Paul Mulcahy is gone, too. They do bring in Noah Fernandez from UMass and a couple other transfers, Austin Williams and Jeremiah Williams. But after missing out last year, Joe, where do you think the expectations for Rutgers are this year?
Don, I think their expectation is they need some. It's kind of a little similar to Wisconsin. They need some bench production. They didn't get it after Mawat Mag was injured last year. They need to score the ball. They can't. It's kind of like Iowa. They can't fail to play one side of the ball while playing the other side really well. Especially, I think they'll survive a little more with defense, more so than Iowa will this year. But I don't see them finishing better than anywhere from the 8 to 11 range. With that said, I think they do go to the 11 range. I don't think them finishing 11th and not making the tournament is anything indicative of Steve Peichel. I still think they'll play quality, hard basketball. That's who he is as a coach. I think Rutgers' best years under him are on the horizon, especially with the recruiting they're doing. But this year it does not seem like a complete roster to me. I have them 11th. I'm really curious to see where you have them.
Yeah, I've got them 1 spot below in 12th, Joe. I think that there's a lot that can go wrong this year for Rutgers. Amori's back, Mag, Hyatt, Simpson. They've got their, some guys back, but I think McConnell being gone is going to be really big. And like you said, they're not deep. They barely have a bench. You got to figure that out in November and December when you're playing teams that you're going to beat by 20 and 30. You got to let some guys have some run, because come Big Ten time, your starters can only go so far. I think Fernandez will be interesting. He might be, I wouldn't say as good as Cam Spencer, but he is pretty good offensively. He shoots it well, and he did it in the A-10, which is not some terrible conference. So he could be at least serviceable offensively. And Derek Simpson, people think that he's going to be a breakout player. So there's a couple things that can go right for Rutgers here, but I just think that Peichel's been in the league for a number of years now. Their hard-nosed style of basketball is not as different as it was a couple of years ago when he first came in, and I just think the talent might be a little lacking, and I would be really shocked to see Rutgers make the tournament, to be honest. They've got a great home crowd, but outside of that, it's going to be tough for them to win road games because their offense did not show up on the road last year, barring, I think, was it the Northwestern game on the road? They scored 79 or something like that. They had one good, nice road win, but other than that, they've really struggled on the road. And I don't think that they're going to build themselves up a big enough cushion to do that again. And I think they should have made the tournament last year and still don't understand why they didn't. But I've got Rutgers 12th here. Somebody has to finish 12th. It's going to be one of those teams in that lower middle range that we said. And I'll probably end up going to a couple of their games this year. But I do think that there's a big chance that it will not be as good as last year. And last year wasn't even in the tournament. So next team we'll go to, Joe. Is that it?
No, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, that's right. There's one more. When it's scrolling down, it's cutting off. So Wisconsin is our last team here. Let's see if I can get to it. Okay, I can't get to it. The Badgers were 20-15 last year overall and 9-11 in the Big Ten. They made it to the semifinals of the NIT. Greg Gard is back for season 9 at the Kohl Center. And for the most part, they return a roster. They should return their whole starting five. That's Chucky Hepburn, Connor Essegian, Max Klesmet, Tyler Wall, and Stephen Crowell. They do bring in A.J. Storr from St. John's, who was a highly touted recruit. Didn't really work out there for Mike Anderson, was really inconsistent. They do have Carter Gilmore coming off the bench. But, Joe, very, very similar to last year, I think, for Wisconsin. You've got a good starting five, but if you have to take on a couple injuries, there isn't much of a bench. But there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Tyler Wall's healthy. Greg Gard can coach as good as any. And I certainly think that Wisconsin will prove that last year was not how their season's going to go.
This might be my boldest take. I do think they'll ride him some games. I think the biggest difference for this team finishing, third, which is where I have them, and ninth, middle of the pack with all the other teams, is having some semblance of a bench. They did lose Jordan Davis. I do think that's a big loss. But if they figure that out and stay healthy, which is something they struggled with last year, I don't see how top four is reasonable for this team. In fact, I've often named them as a dark horse to Michigan State or Purdue.
Thinking about a healthy starting five plus a better player off the bench than really the only player that you had off the bench. I think, I've got them fourth, just one spot behind. And, if a team gets a couple injuries, they're not going to be as good. That's across the board. But Wisconsin's not in a great position to handle those injuries. They really, really struggled last year when Tyler Wall went down. But Crowell can shoot it at 7 feet, and Essegian's a knockdown three-point shooter, and Chucky Hepburn improved from the year before. So I think there's tons of reasons to be optimistic. And I would be really shocked if Wisconsin doesn't make the tournament. I think that the way that they play is not going to be any different than we've seen before for Wisconsin. I think that, the teams that we know we're going to get from are going to be good early. And it's, you obviously want to be playing your best basketball at the end of the year, but it causes your fan base a lot less worry and a lot less worry around the program when you are in January and you are definitely making the NCAA tournament. And I think that Wisconsin can put themselves into that position and worry about, how many quad one wins they have and what seed they're going to be rather than if they're going to get enough wins in general. So that is our 14-team Big Ten preview. We will post our power rankings, condensed and combined, just simple average. I don't think there'll be a whole lot of differences. There's only a couple, Joe, where we were more than one spot different. And in the last couple minutes here, we will go over our all-conference teams. I'll read them out, and then Joe will go over the players a little more. First team, the coach of the year, my coach of the year is Matt Painter. This is a regular season award, remember, and he got it last year deservingly. They're the best team in the league by far. I think the player of the year will be Zach Edey if he plays enough games. Obviously, if he does get injured and has to miss a lot of time, then he can't get the award, but he will get at least 18 points a game. And even if he does, not play as many minutes against some of the easier games early, he'll be up there in the 20s in conference play. And something would have to happen for him not to be player of the year, not just in the Big Ten, but also nationally. And the rest of my first team, I'll read out here, Joe. I've got Tyson Walker from Michigan State, Boo Buie from Northwestern, Terrence Shannon from Illinois, and Cliff Amori from Rutgers. I did have to put another big in there because I didn't want to put 4 guards. So that's where I went with that. And Joe, all those players should be superstars for their team.
Yeah, Sean, I think maybe the only one that would raise eyebrows could be Cliff Amori, but I think he's a guy that, he's been playing college basketball a while. He is the rim protector. He is one of the better athletes you will ever see. And he's so long that you have to figure this is the year he takes a big jump, which is what clearly Sean is expecting. Another one is Tyson Walker. I think a lot of people got on him because he apparently only shows up in late February and March, which, again, even if he does that again, that's the best time for any player to show up. I do think he takes the leadership role on this team along with H.A. Hoggard and Malik Hall. I think the fact that they have so many other pieces on that team too, Sean, with the new freshman in there, Xavier Booker, obviously A.J. Hoggard and Akins can score and make plays. I think that'll take some pressure off Walker. He'll be able to be not even more of a leader, but to just play more freely. He's hit plenty of big shots, so I'm not questioning his nerves or his guts, because he has guts of steel from everything I've seen. I think this is the year he just finds it more consistently, and he plays a little more loose, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, certainly. He's been really good at times over the course of his Michigan State career, but last year he really, really got consistent, solid play, and the numbers may not be there for player of the year because he might average 12 a game or 11 a game, but he's going to be the guy that Michigan State relies on more times than not. The other 3 I've gotten there I think are pretty self-explanatory. They're their lead guards on their team. Second team, Joe, I've got Kevin Willard as the coach. I don't know if Maryland will make a significant step up, but they'll be as good as last year at least, and I think Kevin Willard is really starting to build something in College Park. We liked them, at least some parts of their game last year. I think they will be better at the things that they were good at and better at the things they were bad at last year. I don't know if they're stepping up into the top 25 like all year, but they should be a better team than they were last year.
Yeah, Sean. I don't know what else to add. I frankly think I would insult our viewers if I took credit for your rant. So
yeah, you were on. It was either you or Mike who were on Kevin Willard being your coach of the year.
absolutely.
Joe, my second team, I've got Nkamwa from Michigan, Xavier Johnson from Indiana, Jameer Young from Maryland, Ace Baldwin from Penn State, and Tyler Wall from Wisconsin. You've got players who should be the best players on their team, but also there's a way that there's probably 20 players that could find themselves on the second team.
Yeah, Sean, that'd be my overwhelming comment to you is the second team. I think besides maybe Jameer Young and perhaps if Olivier Kamwa really goes off. There's about 20 players you could probably list down in a minute that could be on the second team. I do think we have the defined stars of the conference. We have the Zach Eves of the world, perhaps Tyson Walker or Terrence Shannon. But besides those guys, I think the end of the first team into the second team, especially at the forward position, is as wide open as it's ever been.
Yes, second teams typically are either the best player on middle of the conference teams or the second best player on top teams. And I pretty much went for the best players in the middle of the pack here. I think Baldwin, Penn State may be at the bottom, but Baldwin, if he plays enough games, he'll be on there. He is really good as a scorer and defensively. But other than that, like a Minnesota player or something like that would have to. I mean, Dawson Garcia would have to average like 20 a game to be on these teams because there are 14 teams and only 10 players that are on our first and second team. So I think that second team is as wide open as really any conference because a lot of conferences have like a solid 8 to 10 players. And I think the Big Ten really only has 3 or 4, and then a lot of players who could be right up there with, for a stretch or could shock the world. Don't think many people would have put Boo Buie on their first team last year, and look what happened. So those posts will be out soon. Be sure to like and subscribe. I think that's all we have for you today. Chuck and I will be on for a Big East preview tomorrow night, and then Joe and I will be back on Monday to do the In a Nutshell podcast, the recap from college football, and then we'll keep you updated on what the schedule will be like while we've got both of football